My wife said she was going for a girls' night. I knew there was something wrong. The tone in her voice, the way she looked away when she said she wouldn't be long, the rush to leave before I could even question her. That poorly told excuse was confirmation of something I had suspected for a long time. It wasn't the first time she went out like this, fixing her hair in a way she no longer did for me, choosing a dress she never wore for our dinners, putting on perfume as if she were going on a date. Because that's what was happening. My wife was leaving to meet another man. I couldn't ignore it any longer. My heart was beating like a drum beating inside my chest when I made the decision to follow her. I grabbed the car keys with sweaty hands, feeling a lump form in my throat. Did I really want to see it with my own eyes? Could my heart bear it? But I already knew the answer. Yes. Because what killed me wasn't the possibility that she was lying. It was uncertainty. The fear of being mistaken. The anguish of continuing to live in the dark, drowning in doubt, while she smiled, came home, and lay down next to me as if nothing had happened. I followed her through the city, keeping enough distance so as not to be noticed. Every traffic light she crossed, every turn she made, every street she took brought me closer to the truth I feared. Until, finally, her fate revealed itself before my eyes. It wasn't a friend's bar, it wasn't a restaurant with groups of women laughing loudly and drinking together. It was a discreet cafe, far away, where a man was already waiting for her. He smiled when he saw her, stood up, opened his arms. And she went to him as if she were coming home. The world stopped. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, I wanted to grab her arm and demand explanations. But I stayed there, trapped, staring at the ridiculous theater she was putting on perfectly. The way she touched his hand on the table, the passionate look she reserved just for him, the easy laugh that I hadn't heard in a long time in our house. This wasn't a casual fling, this wasn't an impulsive one-night stand. It was love. Stolen love. Love that should be mine. My legs finally moved without my mind processing them. Before he knew it, he was already there, standing in front of the two. The shock in her eyes when she saw me was almost satisfying, but the pain followed soon after. Not because of the guilty look. But the way, for a second, she seemed to be calculating how to get out of this, how to fix this with empty words. I knew you were lying to me. My voice sounded firm, despite the hurricane that destroyed everything inside me. You mean nothing in my life now. Silence. The man next to her looked at me warily, like a cornered animal. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Perhaps he knew that any excuse would be useless. Maybe because, at that moment, he realized that everything was over. But the pain of betrayal is not limited to the moment of discovery. It doesn't end when the words are spoken, when the shock wears off, when the tears dry. No. Betrayal settles in the soul like an open wound that never heals. Because betrayal is not just the act. It's everything that comes after. It's suffocating silence. It's the doubt that haunts you. It's the memory of happy days being consumed by the poison of lies. It's the cruel realization that the person you loved wasn't who you thought they were. And then comes the question that keeps pounding your head, why? What did I do wrong? What was missing? Was I not enough? Or could it be that, deep down, she never really loved me? The answers don't matter. Because the only truth that remains after betrayal is that the past cannot be erased. Time doesn't come back. The love that existed was destroyed. And what remains is the need to move forward, even when each step hurts more than the last. But I wasn't just any man. I would no longer be one on her list, a supporting character in the story she wrote without my consent. I would take control of the narrative. And when she thought it was all just a correctable mistake, when she thought she could redeem herself, when she thought she still had power over the situation, she would discover that the real game had barely begun. And that the price of her betrayal would be much greater than she could imagine. After all, I already knew everything long before that night. But what I did with that information, well, that's the part of the story that no one could have predicted. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and never romanticize betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictitious, but they clearly show how infidelity it destroys lives, families and hearts. Betrayal never ends well, and every choice has its consequences. Now, get ready for an intense story, full of twists, raw emotions and an ending that will surprise you. Take a deep breath, because this story will leave you speechless. The clock was almost 8 at night when Ethan got home after a long day at work. The office had been chaos, as always, and he was looking forward to a hot shower, a quiet dinner, and a few moments with his wife, Olivia. Their marriage was almost 8 years old, and although it was no longer filled with the same outbursts of passion as in the early days, there was still something solid there. Or at least that's what he believed. Olivia was the type of woman who lit up any room, her laugh was light, her gaze carried a natural tenderness that made anyone feel special. When they first met, Ethan was completely captured by the way she gestured when she spoke, the way she bit her lower lip when she got nervous, as if her mind was always racing a mile a minute. He fell in love with every detail, every nuance. And even after so long, I still felt genuine admiration for her. The house they shared was spacious, a comfortable 2-story house that they had chosen together a few years earlier. The living room, decorated with neutral tones and a minimalist feel, reflected Olivia's balanced personality. She has always been an organized, practical woman, but with an impeccable sense of aesthetics. Each piece of furniture, each object seemed to be there for a specific reason, as if they were part of a larger story. The kitchen was her favorite territory, a space she mastered to perfection, preparing dishes that Ethan loved to praise. They always had this routine: while she cooked, he sat at the counter and they talked about the day, about random things, laughing and sharing simple but genuine moments. In recent months, however, he had noticed small changes. Details that would perhaps go unnoticed by anyone else, but that, for him, became constant discomfort. Olivia looked different. Nothing blatant, nothing that could be pointed out concretely. But something about her seemed to have changed. The enthusiasm in conversations had diminished, the way they looked at him had become more distant. She smiled, but not in the same way. She kissed him, but her lips didn't have the same heat. And then came the small delays, the frequent excuses, the messages on the cell phone answered too quickly and always with the screen turned down when he was around. That night, when he walked in the door, he found Olivia on the couch, playing on her cell phone, her legs crossed elegantly while bouncing her foot to the beat of some music playing in the background. She looked up and smiled. She said she was tired, that she didn't feel like cooking, so she ordered food. Ethan just nodded, sitting next to her, smelling the sweet scent he always recognized. During dinner, the conversation was casual, superficial. He asked about her day, she answered briefly, without going into details, as if she were distracted by something else. He tried to ignore that feeling that she was distant, that there was something invisible between them. Something he couldn't touch yet, but it was there. After the meal, Olivia got up saying she was going out with her friends. It was something common, but this time, the way she said it seemed different. It wasn't a request for permission, it never needed to be, and he didn't expect it to be, but rather a statement with no room for discussion. Ethan watched as she disappeared upstairs to get ready. He stood there, with the glass of wine in his hand, swirling the liquid inside the glass while his thoughts were confused. Was it absurd to think something was wrong? Or would it be crazy to ignore the feeling that something was slipping through your fingers? When Olivia came downstairs, she looked stunning. Fitted dress, high heels, impeccable makeup. For a moment, Ethan remembered so many nights when she had dressed up like this for him. At the beginning of the marriage, every meeting was a celebration, every touch was intense, full of meaning. But now, seeing her there, ready to leave, the only thing he felt was a tightness in his chest. He wanted to ask where they were going, but his voice broke before he could even formulate the sentence. She smiled softly, took the bag and said she wouldn't be long. A quick kiss on the cheek. And then, the door closed behind her. Ethan stood there, staring into empty space, listening only to the distant sound of car tires disappearing down the street. The silence inside the house became heavy. An uneasiness came over him, a primal instinct that something wasn't right. He took a deep breath, clenching his hands into fists, trying to push those thoughts away. But they were there, alive, pulsating. He was never a paranoid man, he never wanted to be the type of husband who suspected everything. But there, alone in that house, the weight of uncertainty became overwhelming. He took out his cell phone, opened the conversation with Olivia and read the most recent messages. Everything seemed normal. But it was exactly this normality that bothered him. He knew his wife. I knew something was being hidden. The hours passed slowly. Ethan tried to watch a movie, tried to distract himself with a book, but nothing held his attention. From time to time, he glanced at the clock, mentally calculating how long it had been since Olivia had left. She didn't usually take this long. He sent a short message asking if everything was okay. No response. 10 minutes later, he tried again. Still nothing. He grabbed the car keys before he could even think. He didn't plan anything, he just followed the impulse that was pounding in his mind. I needed to know. He needed to see it with his own eyes. Traffic was calm, the city was still pulsing with night lights, couples were walking through the streets, groups of friends were laughing in bars and restaurants. Ethan drove without a clear destination, only guided by the discomfort in his stomach. He thought about passing by the restaurant where Olivia used to meet her friends, but something inside him told him he wouldn't find her there. Then he went to the neighborhood where she worked, where she sometimes mentioned that she liked to go out. The streets all looked the same, until one detail caught his attention. A family car parked in front of a discreet, not very busy cafe. He slowed down, stopped a few meters away. His heart was beating so hard he could feel the blood pulsing in his temples. The car was hers. And, inside the cafe, through the glass, Ethan saw the scene that would change his life forever. But at that moment, he still didn't know. He didn't yet know that his life was about to fall apart. He still didn't know that the love he built was being destroyed right before his eyes. And, worst of all, I still didn't know what I would do with this discovery. The steering wheel was firm in his hands, but Ethan felt no control over anything at that moment. His breathing was ragged, his chest rose and fell in a rhythm that did not obey his reason. The car was parked on a side street, far enough away not to be noticed, but close enough to see every detail through the cafe's glass. Yellow headlights illuminated the cozy interior of the place, creating an intimate atmosphere that contrasted violently with the storm that was beginning to brew inside. There, a few meters away, his wife smiled, talked, leaned forward, touched another man's hand. Each gesture was small, almost insignificant to anyone looking in from the outside, but to Ethan, each detail was a blade embedded in his skin. Time seemed to dissolve as he watched. I couldn't define how long I had been there, with my eyes fixed on that scene, my stomach turning in a mix of anger and disbelief. He blinked less, his eyes burning, as if his own body refused to accept what was before him. There was something cruel in the way Olivia looked at that man, a softness that no longer existed when she looked at him. It wasn't just the physical closeness between the two, it was the sparkle in her eyes, a sparkle that Ethan recognized. A shine that was once his. His hands were sweaty, his jaw clenched. Rational thought said that I could be interpreting everything wrong, that this could be an innocent meeting, a friendly conversation. But instinct, that primal scream inside him, said otherwise. The way she tilted her face slightly when she heard what he said, the way she bit her lip, the short, knowing laugh. These were not gestures of ordinary friendship. These were not gestures from a woman married to another man. They were gestures of someone who felt wanted. And, more than that, from someone who responded to the desire. His mind was divided between two opposing reactions. Part of him wanted to get out of the car, go over there, pull her away from that table, demand explanations, destroy the illusion she was living. But another part, a part he barely recognized, wanted to wait. Observe more. Letting her believe she was still in control of the lie. Because that was what hurt more than anything, the fact that she was safe enough to blatantly lie to him, believing she would never be found out. Tension built like a spring about to release. Ethan didn't blink, his chest barely moved. Then he saw it. Confirmation of everything. The man in front of her brought his hand to Olivia's face, brushing aside a strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek. And she didn't back down. She smiled. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if savoring a desired touch. And then, in a slow, calculated gesture, she slid her hand over his, letting their fingers intertwine for a moment too long to be a simple reflex. Ethan felt a bitter taste rise in his throat. The certainties he was trying to avoid came like a crushing avalanche. There were no more doubts, no more assumptions. This was not an innocent conversation. It wasn't a friendship. It was not an error of interpretation. It was treason. Wide open. Cold. Cruel. Adrenaline flooded his body, muscles contracted, fists clenched. He barely noticed when he opened the car door, his legs moving as if they had a mind of their own. The asphalt beneath his feet felt harder, more real than everything around him. Each step towards the cafe door was a sharp blow to the chest, a drumming of pent-up anger. The mind throbbed with disorganized thoughts. He wondered how many times this had happened before. Whether this was the first time or just the first time he had witnessed it. My stomach was churning, the air felt thick and difficult to breathe. As he pushed open the glass door, a small bell tinkled at the top, announcing his arrival. The sound cut through the silent atmosphere of the cafe like a knife. Olivia looked up immediately, and the look on her face was enough to confirm everything he needed to know. It was a look of shock, of terror. Not just guilt, but fear. Because in that moment, she knew. I found out that I had been caught. I knew there was no more room for excuses, for well-constructed lies. And Ethan knew that moment was the watershed between what they had been and what they would never be again. The man sitting in front of her also noticed the change in the air. He frowned, looked at Olivia, then at Ethan, and then seemed to understand. His expression hardened, his body tensed. But Ethan didn't look away. He didn't care about him. He didn't care about anything at that moment other than the woman sitting there, who until that night bore his wife's name, but who was now just a stranger. He walked to the table with firm steps, without hesitation. Every second seemed to drag on, every movement more charged with meaning than any words he could say. Olivia swallowed, her hands shaking slightly on the table. When Ethan stopped in front of them, the silence was absolute. The entire cafe seemed to have contracted around that moment. He didn't scream. There was no scandal. He just let the words come out, each syllable heavy with the weight of betrayal. I knew you were lying to me. That's all he said. And it was enough. Olivia's eyes widened, her lips parted, but no sound came out. The man next to her looked away, unable to look at Ethan directly. And then, with the devastating calm of someone who has already lost everything, he released the last sentence before turning to leave, "You now mean nothing in my life." And then he turned on his heel and left, leaving behind the woman who had once been his world. But he wasn't finished yet. That night wasn't over yet. And Olivia had no idea what was coming. Ethan left the cafe with firm steps, but inside, he felt like he was sinking into an abyss that he didn't know if he could get out of. The cold of the night was nothing compared to the ice that seemed to run through his veins. Olivia's betrayal wasn't just a stab, it was a deep cut that went beyond the flesh, beyond the soul. It was a poison that spread slowly, paralyzing every feeling, every memory that was once happy with her. He didn't look back. I didn't want to see the look on her face, I didn't want to hear her excuses, her pathetic attempts to justify the unjustifiable. He got into the car, started the engine and drove without a specific destination, just following the road, letting his mind run wild, trying to understand at what moment everything had started to fall apart. But Ethan wasn't a man who just accepted defeat. And deep down, he knew that this game wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. His instinct, the one that had made him follow Olivia that night, told him that there was something bigger behind the betrayal. Something he didn't know yet, but needed to find out. And if there was one thing he hated more than being deceived, it was being made a fool of. He took out his cell phone, opened Olivia's message history and, for the first time, felt that he needed to go beyond what his eyes had already seen. I needed proof. I needed certainty. When he got home, he sat down on the sofa, rested his elbows on his knees and took a deep breath. Her scent still permeated the room, mixed with the perfume of days gone by, with the warmth of memories that now seemed so distant. She got up, walked to her bedroom and opened the drawer where she used to keep her old cell phone that she rarely used. He turned on the device and, to his surprise, the password was the same as always. The feeling that she never even bothered to hide her tracks made his stomach turn. She was too confident. Too sure he would never find out. That just made everything even sicker. It was then that he found the messages. Not just the messages with the lover, but something much worse. A name he hadn't expected to see, a name that made his blood run cold. The conversations were old, but their content transformed his anger into something much greater. There was a plan. There was something planned long before that night. Olivia didn't just cheat on him, she manipulated him. And the worst thing of all was that she wasn't alone in this. He didn't know whether to laugh or scream, whether to throw his cell phone against the wall or whether to simply surrender to the absurdity of the situation. But one thing was certain, Olivia had gone too far. The cell phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen. He stared for a few seconds before answering. The silence of her heavy breathing was the only thing she heard on the other end of the line before she finally spoke. "Please let me explain," he laughed. Not a light laugh, but a bitter laugh, filled with disbelief. "Explain what?" "That you lied to me for months. That you thought I'd never find out. That you destroyed everything we had because of it. It's not what you think, so tell me, Olivia, what should I be thinking? Because from what I've read here, this started much earlier than I imagined. Tell me, since when?" Her silence on the other side was confirmation of everything. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to contain the storm inside him. "Since when?" he repeated, his voice low but carrying a crushing weight. Her breathing shook. 2 years. It was as if the world had stopped spinning. Ethan's chest tightened, his hands tingled. 2 years. 2 whole years of being scammed. 2 years of living with a woman who smiled at him, slept next to him, told him she loved him, while, behind his back, she made an idiot of him. What were you hoping for, Olivia? That I would never find out? That I would continue living this life forever? I didn't want it to be like this. You didn't want to. But you did. You knew exactly what you were doing. You did it knowing you were destroying me. You planned it all, Olivia. You looked me in the eye and still went through with it. She sobbed. I never wanted to hurt you. He clutched his cell phone tightly. Then why did you do it? The silence weighed between them, until she finally whispered something that made everything fall into place. Because I needed to, Ethan. I needed you to find out. Confusion exploded in his mind. He didn't expect to hear that. It didn't make sense. Needed to? What the hell does that mean? Her voice was shaky, but charged with something more. Something he couldn't decipher. I tried to end it before. I tried to end it, but... And that's when everything fell on him like a collapsing building. Ethan wasn't just dealing with betrayal. He was dealing with something bigger. Something that went beyond what he imagined. Something that wasn't just about Olivia, but everything around them. Were you forced to continue? She took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say something she had feared for a long time. He knew too much, Ethan. He knew things about us, about you. He kept me going. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Each piece fit together cruelly. He thought he had seen the worst, but the truth was that the worst was yet to come. And at that moment, he knew that his life would never be the same. Ethan remained silent. The cell phone was still pressed against his ear, but everything around it seemed to be gone. Her breathing was heavy, and her mind was spinning in a whirlwind of thoughts, trying to put each piece together, trying to make sense of Olivia's words. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just a case. It was something bigger. Something that surpassed any limit he had even considered before. His chest rose and fell irregularly, his body filled with tension that seemed unable to dissipate. He closed his eyes, feeling the crushing weight of that revelation. What did she mean by that? What did that man know about him? And why hadn't Olivia said anything before? He kept me going. Those words echoed in Ethan's mind like a death sentence. He wanted to understand, he wanted answers, but at the same time, he felt a growing fear of what was yet to come. Meet me now, his voice was firm, without hesitation. On the other end of the line, Olivia hesitated for a moment. Ethan, Now, Olivia. Her silence was long before she finally let out a shaky breath. In the hotel parking lot, the same one where. She didn't finish the sentence, but Ethan already knew what she meant. He hung up the cell phone without saying anything else. He took the car keys and left the house without looking back. The engine roared as it sped through the nearly empty streets of the city. Streetlights passed like blurred figures through the windshield, and the knot in my stomach grew with every kilometer. The hotel. The place where Olivia had met her lover so many times. The place where it all happened. The place where he would finally discover the truth. When we arrived, the parking lot was almost empty, the cold glow of the streetlights illuminating the concrete wet from the night's humidity. Olivia's car was already there, parked in an inconspicuous corner. He climbed down, the cold early morning air biting his skin. He walked to the vehicle and saw his wife in the driver's seat, her eyes fixed on the steering wheel, her hands gripping the leather as if that were the only thing keeping her grounded in reality. Ethan opened the passenger door and got in. Her scent was there, familiar and strange at the same time. Olivia turned to face him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite define. Fear. Tiredness. Shame. Speak, he ordered, bluntly. She ran her tongue over her dry lips, her fingers drumming on the steering wheel. I tried to leave, Ethan. I tried to cut it off before it went too far. But he wouldn't let me. Why? She closed her eyes for a second, as if trying to gather strength. Because he found out about the fraud. The silence that followed was almost suffocating. Ethan blinked, trying to absorb that information. What fraud? Her breathing quickened. His work. The project you turned in 2 years ago, he knew the numbers were changed. Ethan felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath him. His blood heated up, and a wave of adrenaline took over his body. Are you saying this bastard blackmailed me? Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Yes. And then, it all made sense. 2 years. How long that case had lasted. The change in Olivia. The nights out. The distant looks. It wasn't just an emotional betrayal. It was a power play. She hadn't betrayed him just out of desire or dissatisfaction. It was used. Forced to remain inside a web that, every day, became more suffocating. You lied to me this whole time, Olivia. You let me live in this illusion while this guy played with your life and mine. I had no choice, Ethan. I knew what would happen if you went through with it. You would lose everything. You would be arrested. He ran his hands through his hair, his head throbbing. And instead of telling me, you thought it would be better to give yourself to him? The tears finally rolled down her face. I thought I could protect you. I thought I could keep this under control. But I was wrong. I was stupid. I got more involved than I should have, and now there's no turning back. Ethan felt a bitter taste in his mouth. His anger was mixed with something he didn't want to feel, helplessness. He didn't know what was worse, whether it was the betrayal or the fact that everything had happened because of something that he himself, in a way, caused. The fraud. That project. He remembered the pressure at work, the need to deliver results, to prove that his team was capable of delivering something great. He never wanted anything to change, but it happened. And now, 2 years later, it was coming back to destroy him from the inside out. He wants money, doesn't he? His voice was lower, but full of tension. Olivia nodded slowly. And you won't stop until you do. Ethan clenched his fist. Every cell in his body screamed for justice, for revenge. That man not only destroyed her marriage, he also ruined her life. He had been made into a puppet without even realizing it. But now he knew the truth. And I wouldn't leave it cheap. He turned his face to Olivia, his gaze steady and unwavering. I'll end this. Her eyes widened. What are you going to do? Ethan opened the car door, feeling the adrenaline burning through his veins. What should have been done from the beginning? And then, he left. The night was not over yet. And that story was far from over. Ethan drove slowly out of the parking lot, feeling an unsettling calm that seemed at odds with the emotional turmoil that racked his core. It was as if, finally, all the pieces of that chaotic narrative had fallen into place perfectly, revealing a terrifying image that he refused to fully accept. The wind that came through the car window cut into his face, trying, in vain, to wake him from that state of numbness. The dawn was dense, silent, almost accomplice to your darkest thoughts. He knew he needed to act, but the complexity of the situation prevented him from clearly deciding his next step. Ethan was not the impulsive type of man, he had always preferred to calculate his decisions carefully. But now, he was torn by a fine line between justice and revenge, between dignity and destruction. After all, if he revealed the whole truth about what had happened, he would be exposing not only Olivia, but also himself, to public humiliation and the legal consequences of the fraud committed years before. The deserted streets seemed like a mirror of his soul at that moment, empty and melancholic. Ethan stopped at a remote bar, a discreet place where no one would recognize him. I needed to breathe, reflect carefully. He ordered a strong drink, letting the liquid slowly go down his throat, feeling the heat of the alcohol confront the coldness of reality. As he stared into the glass, he realized for the first time the weight of loneliness. Until that moment, he believed that his life was built on solid foundations, career, marriage, confidence. Now, everything seemed fragile, ready to collapse under the slightest pressure. The drink didn't help, it only increased his feeling of impotence in the face of the choice he needed to make. He could save himself by sacrificing Olivia, or protect her and take the risk of losing everything he fought for over the years. Ethan was brought out of his thoughts by the sound of his cell phone vibrating on the table. When he saw the screen, his heart sped up, but it wasn't Olivia this time. It was an unknown number, and he hesitated before answering. When he finally accepted the call, he heard the firm and direct voice of a man who introduced himself simply as someone interested in talking about the delicate matter that involved him. Ethan felt his body go cold, that was the voice that was missing to complete the nightmare he was living. Without offering details over the phone, the man asked them to meet that night, assuring them that it would be best for both of them to resolve everything quickly, before more people were involved. Ethan agreed, not knowing if he was making the right choice or falling into an even more dangerous trap. Arriving at the marked location, a discreet park, shrouded in the shadows of the trees, Ethan saw a figure leaning against the hood of a car. As he approached, the faint light revealed the face of the man who had destroyed his life without even physically touching him. The man's gaze was calm, devoid of any sign of regret or guilt, which increased Ethan's uncomfortable feeling. The conversation between them was short, but decisive. The man knew exactly what he wanted: money in exchange for silence. His voice, devoid of emotion, contrasted with the veiled and cold threats he made so naturally, demonstrating how accustomed he was to getting exactly what he wanted. Ethan, however, did not respond immediately, keeping his gaze fixed and deep on the man who, until then, had controlled his life through blackmail. It wasn't just money that was at stake there, it was his dignity, his integrity as a man and as a human being. It was at that moment that Ethan realized that paying was not a permanent solution. If you accepted the demand, you would be forever trapped in this cycle of threat and fear. He took a deep breath and, in a surprisingly controlled voice, told the man that he would not accept this proposal. The silence that followed was tense, almost unbearable. The blackmailer seemed surprised for the first time, slightly furrowing his eyebrows in disbelief, but soon recovered his cold and arrogant posture, giving him a cynical smile and warning him about the consequences of his decision. Before leaving, he made it clear that he had no alternative but to publicly expose the truth. Ethan remained motionless as he watched the man slowly drive away in his vehicle, leaving him alone in that dark, empty park, facing the most difficult decision of his life. He felt as if he were on the edge of an abyss, faced with an impossible dilemma: protect his life, his career and his name, or save Olivia, the woman he still deeply loved despite everything. That choice had no winners, only victims. It was unfair, but inevitable. Life had cruel ways of taking responsibility for mistakes made, even those that seemed insignificant or forgotten by time. Ethan finally understood that he had entered a perverse and dangerous game, where any wrong move could mean his definitive downfall. Without realizing it, Ethan began to walk slowly through the night, letting his thoughts flow freely through his tired mind. No matter how much he tried to push it away, the image of Olivia crying, desperate in the car, wouldn't leave his head. He knew she had made a mistake, but now he understood the extent of the silent sacrifice she had made for him. Even betrayed, humiliated and deceived, a part of him still wanted to protect her, to spare her the humiliation that he himself was not willing to face. But what about him? How much was it worth sacrificing himself to protect a woman who had accepted such a cruel condition to spare him the consequences of his own mistakes? Ethan was trapped in an emotional maze from which there was no easy or painless exit. When he finally returned home, Ethan felt exhausted, emotionally devastated, but something inside him was beginning to take shape. An idea, a possibility that is still obscure, but real. Maybe there was a different way to handle this situation, a path he hadn't yet considered, but now seemed like the only way to find justice without completely destroying his or Olivia's life. He needed time to mature that idea, he needed to gather the courage to act firmly and clearly in the face of that crisis that challenged not only his marriage, but his own morality. Sitting on the empty sofa in the living room, Ethan felt for the first time that he was no longer alone in this fight, despite the painful silence that permeated the environment. He couldn't change what had already happened, but now he had the power to define how he would act in the face of the chaos that life had imposed on him. He knew that any decision made at that moment would forever define the man he would be from then on. Ethan was determined to fight, but the way he would choose to fight was not yet clear. All that remained was the certainty that, whatever his decision, the consequences would be definitive, striking and irreversible. The question that remained unanswered now was clear and simple: would it be worth risking everything to preserve what little was left of his humanity, or would it be better to lose everything to finally achieve the peace that had been stolen from him so long ago? In the days following that decisive night, Ethan fell into an almost automatic routine, his thoughts divided between silent anguish and the growing need to free himself from this untenable situation. He avoided direct contact with Olivia, although he couldn't help but feel her constant presence, permeating every room in the house and every moment of his day. It wasn't easy to ignore the woman who, despite everything, still represented an essential part of his life and what he had become over the years. Each space in the shared home carried marks of lost happiness, memories that he insisted on avoiding, but that returned, inevitably, whenever his eyes fell on familiar objects. The house, once a welcoming refuge, now seemed like a museum of moments he would rather forget, a permanent exhibition of the choices that led him there. One day, while Ethan was in the office, trying futilely to focus on any task that distracted him from that dark reality, he received an unexpected message from his lawyer, Amanda. The short and direct text only said that it was urgent to talk in person. Intrigued and apprehensive, Ethan arranged a meeting the same day, at a discreet cafe near the center, anxiously awaiting her response. When he saw her arrive, he immediately noticed the serious and worried expression on the lawyer's face, who wasted no time with formalities as she sat down in front of him. Amanda pulled some documents from the folder she had with her, took a deep breath and revealed that things had evolved quickly after the meeting between Ethan and the blackmailer. The man had approached the authorities, offering compromising evidence of the fraud that had occurred years before. Ethan felt his body freeze for a brief moment. That was exactly what he feared. With a sinking heart, Ethan listened carefully to every word Amanda said, as she explained the possible legal implications of the report and the actions that should be taken immediately to minimize the damage. His career, reputation and future were now irreversibly threatened, and Ethan realized, for the first time, the real dimension of the consequences that his previous decisions had generated. Amanda advised him to face the situation openly, prepare to defend himself in court, clarifying every detail, as it was the only way to avoid an even greater disaster. Upon leaving that meeting, Ethan felt the crushing weight of responsibility on his shoulders. I knew that the next step required courage and maturity, and I could no longer delay it. Having decided, he headed to the building where Olivia worked. He needed to see her, not to confront her again or blame her, but to let her know what was coming. Upon entering the office, he found Olivia sitting alone, staring at nothing through the window with an expression of deep sadness. Upon seeing him, she stood up slowly, surprised and apprehensive, as if expecting a new fight. Ethan, however, calmly approached, keeping a safe distance but allowing himself to look deeply into her eyes. His voice was low and contained when revealing the content of the conversation with Amanda, without softening the words or minimizing the risks. Olivia listened in silence, feeling the weight of each word. When he finished, she remained still, looking at him with a mixture of pain and gratitude. "Ethan, you didn't need to tell me all this now," he finally said, controlling the emotion in his voice with an effort. "But I needed to," he replied, in a calm but firm tone, "because regardless of what happened, this situation directly affects both of us, and you deserve to know the complete truth, without secrets or illusions." The silence that followed was full of meaning, as both reflected on the real implications of that moment. Olivia slowly reached out her hand, gently touching Ethan's arm. "I'm sorry I caused all of this. You didn't deserve to suffer for the bad choices I made." Ethan didn't move away from the touch, allowing himself for the first time in days to feel a real connection with her again, even if it was fragile and full of wounds. As he left the office, Ethan felt a strange sense of relief. Not because he had resolved the situation, but because, for the first time, he felt that he had regained some form of control over his life, facing the problem directly, without fear or cowardice. He knew the road ahead was difficult, but he was ready to face it with dignity, regardless of the consequences. That night, alone at home, Ethan received another unexpected message. This time, it wasn't Amanda or Olivia, but an old friend, Claire, who she hadn't spoken to in a long time. Claire was a woman Ethan had met in college and had a genuine and deep friendship with, but who had naturally grown distant over the years. In the message, Claire mentioned that she had heard about his problems and offered to talk, offering support that seemed to come at just the moment he needed it most. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but ended up accepting the invitation to meet her the next day, feeling that this could be an opportunity to find some comfort amid the emotional chaos. The meeting with Claire took place in a small Italian restaurant, a place that seemed far from all the confusion Ethan found himself in. When he saw her, he felt a pleasant warmth in his chest, a comforting feeling of familiarity and security. Claire was exactly as she remembered, kind, understanding, and incredibly empathetic. They made small talk at first, but soon the topic turned to the delicate situation Ethan was facing. Unlike the other tense and heavy conversations, Claire managed to create a welcoming environment, allowing Ethan to talk openly about his deepest feelings without fear of judgment or recrimination. "You're being incredibly strong," Claire commented, her expression sincere and supportive. Ethan smiled slightly, feeling vulnerable for the first time in a long time. "I don't know if this is strength or just survival, Claire. I'm really not sure of anything at the moment." She gently touched his hand on the table, a natural and comforting gesture. "You may not realize it, Ethan, but admitting your weaknesses, your mistakes, and facing them that way, that's true strength." Claire's words brought him unexpected comfort, an emotional relief he hadn't felt since it all began. On the way back home, Ethan reflected deeply on that conversation, realizing that he had found a safe haven in the midst of the storm in Claire. His life was still filled with uncertainty, but for the first time, he felt that perhaps he could find some meaning again, some greater purpose, even in the face of the mistakes he had made and the inevitable consequences. Claire's presence didn't just represent emotional support, but a powerful reminder that he could still start over, rebuild his life on more solid and true foundations. As he entered the house that night, Ethan took a deep breath, feeling stronger and more determined. He still had a long way to go, but he was determined to face the consequences with dignity, accepting his mistakes without hiding, accepting that some losses would be inevitable, but that the only way to find peace would be to face his problems directly, without running away or hiding. Before going to sleep, Ethan took out his cell phone and wrote a short and direct message to Amanda, confirming that he was ready to face whatever came his way, regardless of the outcome. When he turned off the device, he felt an unexpected lightness take over his body. He knew there were no guarantees of victory or redemption, but at that moment, he was absolutely sure that he was finally making the right decisions, even if they were painful. Ethan was ready to face whatever challenge life had in store for him now, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had once again found some peace amidst the chaos that had settled into his existence. The following weeks were decisive for Ethan and Olivia. There was no longer any way to escape the approaching storm, so both faced the consequences with all the courage they had left. The trial was difficult and merciless, putting on public display everything they had tried to hide for so long. Ethan faced heavy accusations, saw his professional reputation crumble within minutes, but, surprisingly, felt relieved to finally publicly admit his responsibility. There was something liberating about acknowledging the truth before everyone, about no longer living under the crushing weight of lies and manipulation. In the end, after an arduous legal battle, Ethan received a relatively light sentence due to his complete and transparent cooperation throughout the process. However, his career, as he knew it, was definitively over. Olivia, on the other hand, bore the harshest emotional weight. His active participation in blackmail was also revealed, but the court understood that his actions had been under extreme emotional duress. Still, his life would never be the same. She lost the trust of her closest friends, her family kept their distance, and she found herself isolated amid the ruins of the life she had built with Ethan. Despite this, Olivia did not allow herself to fall into absolute despair. She accepted the consequences of her actions with unexpected serenity, perhaps because she finally accepted that she needed to face her own mistakes maturely. She chose to move to another city, deciding to start over from scratch, seeking, above all, to forgive herself for the damage caused to Ethan and herself. The blackmailer, who until then believed he had absolute control over the situation, received a very different fate than planned. During the trial, additional evidence revealed that Ethan had not been his only victim. An in-depth investigation showed that he extorted countless people with similar strategies. His sentence was harsh and exemplary. His previous arrogance turned into a dejected and defeated expression, when he realized that his game was definitely over, paying with his freedom for the years of manipulation and threats committed. Ethan, after everything, decided to sell the house he shared with Olivia and moved to a modest apartment in another neighborhood. It represented a symbolic fresh start, an attempt to physically move away from the painful memories of the past. Still shaken by the circumstances, he realized that he had a lot to rebuild within himself before he could move forward emotionally. During that difficult time, Claire remained by his side, offering him not only friendship but crucial emotional support. The closeness between the two grew naturally, revealing a genuine and deep feeling that neither of them had planned or imagined. Ethan, however, did not allow himself to speed things up. He needed to first find peace with himself before opening himself up to love again. Time passed, and almost a year later, Ethan finally found a new perspective. He decided to use his experience to help others who found themselves stuck in similar ethical dilemmas, working as a consultant for companies facing compliance and ethics issues. The job gave him real satisfaction, something he had never fully felt in his previous career. His experience had given him a unique perspective, and he transformed his pain and shame into something constructive, capable of preventing other people from going through the same suffering he had experienced. One night, unexpectedly, Ethan received a text from Olivia. It had been a long time without contact, and the surprise at seeing her name made his heart quicken. In the short text, she explained that she was fine, living in another place and dedicating herself to volunteering, helping women victims of violence and emotional blackmail. He said he had finally found the peace he was looking for and sincerely asked for forgiveness for the damage he had caused. Ethan responded with just one short but meaningful sentence, "I've already forgiven you, Olivia. May you also be able to forgive yourself." That simple exchange of words meant real and mature closure for both of them, finally freeing them from the emotional chains that tied them to the past. Claire and Ethan, after some time, assumed a more serious relationship, built on solid and true foundations. She represented for him not only a new love, but also a second chance to build an honest and happy life. Claire fully understood his emotional scars and respected his rhythm, allowing Ethan to feel confident again in himself and in another person. With her, Ethan finally realized that love didn't need to be fraught with uncertainty and anguish. It could be something light, authentic, and full of complicity. Each character in that story found a different path, shaped by the consequences of the decisions made. Ethan learned that the truth, no matter how painful, would always be the only possible path to a real and authentic life. Olivia discovered that, even after making serious mistakes, there was still a chance for redemption and personal transformation. The blackmailer faced the harsh consequences of a life based on exploiting other people's weaknesses, losing his freedom as the price for the damage he caused. Claire became the symbol of a new beginning for Ethan, proving that even after great emotional storms, it is possible to rebuild yourself and be happy again. This story clearly demonstrates that our choices always have consequences, and that there is no genuine happiness in relationships or actions that cause suffering to others. Betrayal, in all its forms, destroys lives, but sincerity, forgiveness and the ability to start over with dignity are the only real ways to overcome the pain caused by it. And now, we want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments about the decisions made by the characters, and what you would do if you were in their shoes. Your participation is very important to us. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell, so you don't miss any of our exciting and impactful stories that are regularly posted here. Always remember, our channel never supports or encourages any type of betrayal. The stories presented here are fictional, designed to warn about the serious consequences that this type of behavior can have on people's lives. Thank you very much for following along, and see you in the next video.